Resident Evil 3 Remake has dropped. I use air quotes when I say the word remake for reasons I'll explain later in this video. It was my most anticipated release of 2020. I played it, I finished it, and originally I wasn't planning on doing a review for it, but I'm actually so surprised at how split down the middle the opinions on this game are, even among the fan base. So I've decided to throw my 2 cents in great detail. I didn't want to be one of those channels that gets a review copy of the game and then spits out a review the next day in order to collect those quick, easy views. I wanted to spend a real amount of time with it in order to fully form my opinion. Before we get started, I do want to make it clear there will be some spoilers in this review, so don't get mad at me later if you hear something you don't want to hear. I'll stay away from some major plot points and surprises, but I will be showing footage of some of the boss battles. I just have to show some of the stuff to get the points across that I'm trying to make. Let me go ahead and tell you who this game is not for. If you're looking for a shot-for-shot remake of the original Resident Evil 3, this is not your game. It was never meant to be a simple remake, which is why the words remake or remaster are not in the title. It's a from-the-ground-up reimagining of the story, which is one of my favorite things about this game. I don't see the point of reimagining a game if it's not going to be significantly different from the original. If that's the case, then you may as well just go play the original, which you can still do. But the setting remains the same, starting just before the events of Resident Evil 2 and ending just after the events of Resident Evil 2. Just like the originals, Resident Evil 3 takes us back to Raccoon City when the outbreak has fully gone out of control, and the city is at the peak of its chaos, and Jill Valentine has to find her way out of the city before it's too late, but Umbrella unleashed the monstrous nemesis to hunt her down, and destroy the remaining STARS members in the city. I won't spend too much time on the overall story because I feel that most people have some basic knowledge of the events of Raccoon City. But how did I feel about this game overall? When I first beat it, I really liked it. But I still kind of liked Resident Evil 2 Remake a bit more. After I played through this game 4 or 5 more times, I absolutely loved it. It's a game that I enjoyed the more and more I played it. And that's how it was designed and intended to be played. So let's start by addressing some of the more common criticisms you'll hear. The length. That's all you hear about on the internet. It's short and it's not worth it. And that's a little disingenuous when people are saying that without talking about everything that the game has to offer. But what is a short game? Any game is short if you put it on the standard difficulty setting, blow through the campaign one time, then stick it on your shelf. If that's how you played Resident Evil 3, you're really missing out. Old school Resident Evil has always been designed around the aspect of replayability. You don't just play the campaign once and call it a day. That's just not how you Resident Evil. And Resident Evil 3 makes this more than obvious, since when you beat the campaign the first time, then you unlock more difficulty levels. Then you unlock challenges and an entire store full of rewards. To give you some insight into my experience, the first playthrough took me just over 8 hours. I made sure to kind of take my time and explore my surroundings, do optional backtracking for items that you don't necessarily need but that may help you out, and read notes along the way that do an awesome job filling in the lore of the universe. So if you're not interested in doing multiple playthroughs, you're really missing out on a major aspect of the game that the developers are intending for you to play through. After I beat it on hardcore, the more challenging Nightmare mode unlocks, and this mode really starts flirting with 1 or 2 hit kills. But if you use the points in the store wisely, you can buy a handgun with unlimited ammo. It won't help you much against bosses, but makes the experience a bit easier with the rewards that you earn. Points are unlocked by satisfying the conditions of the challenges offered under the records section. Some are pretty basic and you'll just get them naturally as you're playing, like killing a certain amount of enemies with a specific weapon, to the much more difficult ones like beating the entire game without using health items, never touching the storage box, and after you beat Nightmare mode, you unlock the even harder Inferno mode. And it's not just the same game with harder enemies. Enemy placement's been changed, the amount of enemies and types have changed up a bit, and even the infamous zombie Brad of classic Resident Evil returns to harass you. After you face him the first time, something you completely miss out on if you just play the easier difficulties. It's not in there. Many players may be put off by how difficult it can be, but again, replaying the game, getting better at it, earning points, and unlocking more rewards can get you an unlimited rocket launcher and coins that when equipped increase your defense and attack capabilities. If you're a player that wants everything handed to you on a silver platter, this game is not for you. Even with an unlimited rocket launcher equipped, Inferno is still a challenge because Nemesis can one-hit kill you if he gets you just right, but you are able to use the rewards you've earned for multiple playthroughs as you've learned the game. I even managed to do an S rank run on Inferno this way. By By the time I 100%ed the game with all the achievements and all the challenges, I had put almost 40 hours into the game. Would that still be a short game from that point of view? That's a question that should be asked, but it doesn't seem to be getting addressed by mainstream media and larger, more established YouTube channels. Resident Evil 3 is as different from Resident Evil 2 as the originals were from each other. The original 3 was always a more fast-paced, action-packed experience, whereas 2 was always the slower, more horror-oriented one. The remakes of both 2 and 3 represent each one appropriately. What this game does best is keep the story going. There's rarely a slow moment. You're always accomplishing one goal and headed right towards the next. While Nemesis pops up every once in a while, another source of criticism, the big guy himself. I've heard he's a pushover, I've heard he's underused. I don't even understand these talking points, especially when taking the original game into context. I want to stress that the original Resident Evil 3 is an undisputed classic. But if we remove the nostalgia glasses for a moment, is Nemesis really that much more threatening in the original? I mean, in the first couple of encounters, you can easily run past him, I've got the footage right here, and you can escape with very little effort. No! Peace out. And in later encounters, you can either do the same, or you can electrocute him, putting him down instantly the second you're able to move. He doesn't really become a huge threat until the very end of the game. In the new Resident Evil 3, simply walking past him won't work as well. He's a much bigger threat, especially in the harder difficulty settings. If you think he's kind of a pushover, pump it up to Inferno mode and tell me that. There's segments where you have to dodge a barrage of rockets he's launching at Jill, you have to run away from his flamethrower. Jill gets a beating in this game. And not to mention several forced boss battles in which he's constantly mutating into a more dangerous form after each defeat as you go further into the game. One boss battle in particular I think was my favorite, where he's a big hulking beast and you gotta shoot the little buttons that electrocute him and then acid falls on him, which if you played original Resident Evil 3 you would know that this whole battle is inspired by the one in the Dead Factory from the original. So Nemesis is underused and he's a big pushover. Did people fall asleep during these parts? And like I said before, Jill gets a beating, but she can also give Nemesis an ass kicking if you prepare appropriately. And if you're wise with your inventory, the game does do a really good job preparing you, with better and better weapons as you progress. Even from a story point of view, it makes sense that Jill would be more prepared to take on Nemesis. In Resident Evil 2, many would agree that the Tyrant was much scarier as a pursuer. But let's look at the characters you're playing as. Claire's a regular girl that's had some basic weapons training from her brother. Leon's a rookie cop on his first day on the job. Jill, on the other hand, has been through the mansion situation already, and she was already part of an elite special forces unit. She should be more capable of taking on a force like Nemesis. And although this game overall is much more action-packed, there's still some jump scares to be had here and there that got me pretty good. It's explosive. I know he's gonna come up. Fuck! Oh my god, I shit. No, I wasn't ready! No! I shit my pants. I shit my pants. Because I just knocked him down again. I didn't get anything that time. No! Which means Nemesis is gonna come back now. Oh my god, I just said it! What is this? This game's listening to me. And you also hear a lot about the game being lazy because it reuses some assets. I feel like many people that say that don't know anything about game development. Reusing assets is an extremely common thing that's done to cut on production time. I don't even feel like I need to mention this, but I guess I do. Does no one remember the police department in the original Resident Evil 2? That was completely reused in Resident Evil 3. Sure, Jill is wearing Zoe's shirt from Resident Evil 7 at the beginning, and she also hops into Ethan's car from Resident Evil 7. So what? If she wore a different shirt and drove a different car, would that really change your enjoyment of the game at all? And one more criticism I would like to address is all the talk of cut content. I don't think it's really fair to refer to what's been removed without bothering mentioning the brand new content added in its place. It seems the biggest points being brought up are the removal of the clock tower in the park. I suspect this was more of a design choice to keep the story going at a steady pace. In my opinion, the park in the original was always my least favorite environment. It's boring, and I felt it slowed down the pace of the story. And while the game retains a forced encounter with Nemesis outside the clock tower, you don't go inside. But again, I don't feel we're missing much from losing that. Again, without the nostalgia glasses, what was the original clock tower inside? It was really just an item and key hunt with a crystal puzzle that everybody Googles solutions to anyways. And speaking of puzzles, yes, there are less puzzles, thankfully. I'd rather not mess with that damn water treatment puzzle again. As I mentioned before, there's large segments of original content that's been added. Carlos gets some time in the police station, versus Jill like in the original. The hospital section has been greatly expanded from the original game. Instead of just going in, finding a vaccine, and leaving, now there's an entire horde of zombies that you have to fight off as you're waiting to blow an entrance. One of my favorite moments in the entire game. Then Jill can go through a second time in the hospital and collect things that Carlos didn't have access to. The hospital also has an entire underground area that's also an original addition, and of course the secret Umbrella Lab where the conclusion of the game takes place. Again, all you hear is about cut content, but never the additions. The game's also missing the choice system in place of a more linear story-driven experience. So let's ask ourselves a question. In the original, did the choices really change the game that much? No. For example, you can choose to fight Nemesis, or you can knock him off the bridge. Well, no matter what, short moments later, you still end up in the same areas no matter what choice you made. In the original, the biggest difference the choices actually made just dictated if Nikolai lived or died at the end of the game, and whether Barry appeared in the ending or not. Either way, everything still culminates to the same outcome. Did having the choice system really create that different of an experience? And I think that's where Capcom's thinking was with this. No, it doesn't. Instead, they chose to craft one linear story, which I think does serve this new remake Resident Evil universe well. Let me also mention that some people are complaining there's only one campaign and praising Resident Evil 2 for having two campaigns. Although, when Resident Evil 2 came out, it was getting crapped on constantly for having two campaigns that were so similar. So, which is it? And by the way, the original Resident Evil 3 also had one campaign. That's never not been the case. One aspect Resident Evil 3 Remake improves over the original is giving characters expanded roles. Nikolai still pops up and screws you over from time to time, and he became a villain that I love to hate. I wanted him dead. In this game, he's a villain that would fit perfectly in a Die Hard movie. And characters like Tyrell in the original show up for one scene and die just as quickly, without you really experiencing them no matter what choices are made. In the remake, he gets a much more expanded role alongside Carlos and Jill. These are the kind of differences I wanted to see in this new vision of the story, and Capcom delivered that. Even Brad was vastly improved. Brad Vickers, the man whose character in the original universe just amounted to being the wuss of the team that flew away, and gets killed by Nemesis right at the beginning. Without going into too many spoilers, now he's portrayed as a more heroic character, and his death is used to cleanly tie into the events of Resident Evil 2. If you want everything to happen exactly as it did in the original, this game is not for you. While I think Resident Evil 3 is an outstanding game, I don't want it to seem like it's perfect. Even the best games have their flaws. This is no different. So let's go ahead and get into the things I thought could have been done better. Capcom is fantastic at listening to fan feedback and making changes, and many of the changes we see in Resident Evil 3 reflect that. In Resident Evil 2, the harder modes gave you the old school saving system where you had limited ink ribbons and had to think carefully on when to use them and when to save them. If you use up all your ink ribbons and die, you're screwed. This gave Resident Evil 2 an enormous sense of constant tension. Many players at the time complained that it made the game too hard, and Capcom took that feedback and changed it. Now, even on Inferno mode, it lets you save at any time, as many times as you want. You're worried about surviving and having to reload back to your last save? Well, go kill that hunter and go save. Then go kill the other hunter and go save again. When you reload, they're both still dead. No real repercussions for doing this. You can save as much as you want at a typewriter, and there are regular checkpoints. This completely removes that sense of tension, and it does feel sort of like a disservice to the more hardcore fans in favor of satisfying the more casual player base. Why not have an ink ribbon mode for the players that would have found some enjoyment in its challenge? This whole system makes Resident Evil significantly easier than Resident Evil 2. While this might be a pro for some, it's definitely a con for me. And the knives in Resident Evil 2 weren't unbreakable, so you had to think carefully on when to use them. That's also been changed. Now it's back to the survival knife. Worried about your ammo and aiming your headshots carefully? No big deal, just aim for the legs, and when the zombie drops, then knife them until it's dead. Again, it makes things way too easy. And I also had this criticism for Resident Evil 2. Why are we removing the bug-like enemies completely? In Resident Evil 2, the moth was taken out, the spiders. Resident Evil 3 does the same thing, and I don't really understand the reasoning behind that. I'm a huge fan of enemy variety in games. The more you have, the better. Even the Gravedigger, the giant worm boss from the original, didn't make the cut. I do agree that it should have been included in some way, because more bosses is never a bad thing to me. And the Drain Demos from the original are the bug monsters that they kept, but they're only in one very short section, and they're practically no threat at all. They're very easily killed. I would have liked to see more of them in the game and perhaps have them be a more dangerous threat. And Mercenaries mode, that's gone too. That's a big letdown. I really enjoyed that mode and thought it would have served the remake well, especially if they had let us play segments as characters like Tyrell or Murphy. And I won't go into Resident Evil Resistance since it really is a totally separate game, advertised as the Resident Evil 3 multiplayer mode. It's not. Resistance is its own thing, its own download, its own set of achievements. It's a different game. Overall, those are my detailed thoughts on Resident Evil 3 Reimagining. I won't sit here and blindly defend it as a perfect game. I loved huge, enormous portions of this game, but still identified some of its shortcomings. I still think Doom Eternal is my #1 game of the year so far, with Resident Evil 3 a very close second. Actually, with Doom Eternal, I can't think of anything I didn't like about that game. That game was perfect. But like I said, this is a close second. It honors the original while still being its own separate thing. You can play the original Resident Evil 3 and this one back to back, and they're two totally different experiences. That's how a reimagining should be. I don't want to feel like I played the same game with shinier graphics. It makes me excited for any future reimaginings. I would love to see Resident Evil Code Veronica Remake and Resident Evil 1 remake. But why don't we take it to the next level and get real obscure? How about Resident Evil Gaiden Remake? Or Resident Evil Survivor Remake in VR? Leave me your thoughts down below. What did you think of Resident Evil 3? What remakes do you want to see Capcom pump out next? And what do you want to see in the future of Resident Evil? That's all I got for you today. I'll catch you guys later.
Since you made it to the end of this video, I assume you enjoyed it, so why don't you go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any new content. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, links in the description below, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can join my Patreon or become a channel member. This is Fabian, I love you guys, and I'll see you next time.